Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. Today I wanted to give you some thoughts on being a truther homeschool mom. I realize that I've taken two pretty extreme positions and kind of meshed them together in my life because on one hand I am a Christian homeschool mom and on the other hand I am a truther. And so a lot of people will ask me, how do you reconcile the two? Or better yet, how do you balance homeschooling your children when you know that most of what we have been taught is a lie? And today I'm hoping to maybe clarify how we do things here. It might not be how everyone does things, but I don't know. I'm hoping that it will help because I've realized that I never thought that I would say this about myself, but I'm a bit of a skeptic. I am very skeptical about everything that is presented to us in the mainstream because especially now in this day and age when we can see it pretty blatantly happening right in front of us, although a lot of people still don't notice it, we're lied to a lot. And a lot of it is social engineering. They want us to act a certain way. They want us to believe certain things so that we will act those certain ways. And more of us are starting to wake up, and more of us are homeschooling our children. Now, this is not the reason that I started homeschooling in the first place, but homeschooling has certainly been a blessing now because I'm able to at least give my children both sides of the equation when it comes to certain things. And it's funny because when you hear a lot of people naysaying homeschooling, they will tell you that homeschool parents are indoctrinating children, that their children will only learn one viewpoint on things, when it couldn't be further from the truth, because at least in our homeschool, I want my children to know more than one side. I want them to ask questions because that is what I am doing, is I am asking questions. Children who in school question things are usually punished or maybe name called by other students. They're made pariahs if they don't believe certain things. So, I'm not quite understanding how people believe that children in school are actually learning, more than one viewpoint on things. So with that being said, I do think that finding a balance in your homeschool is so important because you don't want to be guilty of doing exactly what we are accusing the schools of doing, which they usually are doing. We don't want to tell our children only one side of the story because the fact remains that if your child is going to learn how to have proper reasoning skills and if they're going to be able to navigate their way in the world, they're going to need to know how to research things, how to formulate their own educated opinion about things. And so you don't want to hand things to them and expect them to believe them just because you, the parent, are saying that it's true, especially when it comes to educating your children. A properly educated child will know how to find the answers that they are looking for. And sometimes they might not find a concrete answer, but they may at least be able to find enough evidence that they can decide what they think is most likely in that case. So you need to be straightforward with your children. And that's one thing. If you have a good relationship with your children, if you're very open with them, they already know what you think about certain things. So even if you are using, for example, traditional homeschooling curriculum with your children, this is a question that a lot of people ask me is, what sort of homeschool curriculum do I use with my children if I believe that most of them are probably not telling the correct things? Well, I'll get to this a little bit later, but I do typically use more traditional curriculum, and I'll tell you how I do that, and I'll tell you why I do that. But again, it's important that your kids just be open with them right from the beginning and help them to know that, history, well, this is something that I tell my children, history is written by the victors. And we know that it's been manipulated. We know that much of what we are taught about our past is not accurate. It's not correct. And so when we do learn about certain historical events or certain historical facts, what I always tell them is that this is what most people believe. And so a lot of this could very possibly be true, but we need to take this with a grain of salt because we don't know 100% that this is a fact, because, even if you look around the world, different countries will look at one event and they will give entirely different viewpoints on it, because it just depends on where it's coming from. And it's important that your children know that. And even when it comes to science, science is up for debate, and they won't tell you that in schools. A lot of what they're teaching in science is more like scientism. It's almost like a religion. You are not allowed to question science at all anymore. And there are certain things when it comes to homeschooling that I'm pretty confident in sharing with my children. Like what mammals are, what reptiles are, how plants produce their food, those sorts of things. But then there are those other kind of more gray areas when you talk about cosmology, when you talk about just the formation of the earth and the universe in general, where people came from, climate change. There are a lot of different aspects that are taught in schools as if they 100% know for a fact that what they are teaching is accurate. But it's not. It's up for debate. Even gravity. A lot of people don't know that even gravity is just a theory. People try to tell you that it's a law. It's not a law. Gravity is a theory. And so that's something else, that I share with my children. Science is very often, it's more about following the money trail. You have to see who is funding certain aspects of science, because unfortunately what has been happening is that the narrative for, like, the common narrative for that time period is what is going to be pushed forth when it comes through in a lot of science. Unfortunately, money talks in science nowadays. A lot of people aren't really in it for the love of researching, or they might start out with a love of researching, but when they see that certain things are going to get more funding, or if they believe certain things, they might get blacklisted or they might lose tenure, they're going to very quickly lose the love that they once had just for finding out the truth about how our world works, and they might unfortunately sell themselves out and just start doing the things that they need to do in order to get by. And this is something else that I share with my children. So when it comes to homeschooling, I typically do teach my children the traditional viewpoint that is being taught in schools. But I don't teach only the traditional viewpoint. I tell them this is what most children are learning, or this is what most people believe, and this is what I believe, and I tell them why. And I explain both sides of the issue to them, or sometimes there's more than just two sides of the issue. But I think it's important that children, even if you know that what they're being told is probably not 100% the truth, you don't want your children to grow up and be out and about in a world in which they are going to look ignorant, because they are not going to know what other people are referring to when it comes to certain things, maybe in history or certain aspects of science. So you do want to present these things to your children so that they at least know. And then if you also give them the other point of view, which they will not get in school, your children can be equipped to make their own decision. Because again, it's so important that you don't teach your children to only accept what they've been told, because that is what caused this problem to begin with. We want to have thinking children, not children who are just going to parrot what we say or what their teacher says. So for us, for homeschooling curriculum, I don't use textbooks. I don't like them. I never have. I just think they're very boring. They're very dry. They don't give in-depth information about certain areas, especially if your kids really like a certain topic. You're not going to find a lot of information on anything in a textbook. So what we typically do are unit studies, which I'll leave links to unit studies in the description box so that I don't have to describe here what they are. But we use unit studies, and my kids will watch a lot of videos, and we will use a lot of living books. And I do talk about living books and videos, so I will leave a link in the description box for those also. The nice thing about unit studies is that a lot of the activities are very open-ended. So there's no like yes or no concrete answers. You just have an idea of something to look into or something to learn about, and then they can then formulate their own opinion, or you can work on these things together. And so that's what I like about unit studies, is that there's more flexibility in what your children are learning about. When it comes to videos, my kids know that I will often like pause a video in the middle of it and I'll say, okay, now that's what they typically tell you, but this is what I believe. And then I will tell them why. And again, if you have reasons to back up what you're saying, your kids will understand why you believe the way that you believe. I also use living books, and living books are just basically books that are written by authors who really have a love of the subject. So textbooks do not fall in the living books category, but some living books would be like historical fiction or biographies, autobiographies, nonfiction books, otherwise known as trade books. That's what we use also, but you're not going to find a lot of books that really follow along the line of thinking that most of us truthers have, although there are more nowadays, so I'm excited about that. But that's just another learning opportunity for you and for your children, because again, when you're reading these books, you can stop and you can say, okay, this is what most people think, but I think that this is also a really good possibility. And then you share what you think with your children also, and again, explain why you think that. So there are some really great examples in fiction that you can use with your children when you're homeschooling them, depending on their age level. But read alouds are huge in our house. I will read books. Usually nowadays it's usually chapter books. It was picture books when my children were younger, but now, we're just reading novels aloud, and we can use those as, kind of bridges to see how something could possibly happen and what it would look like, or what it looks like in the book. So like 1984 is one. That's not particularly one I would do a read aloud of, because there is some more mature content in that, which means that you really need to be careful that you're using it with more mature children. But 1984 is a great way for you to show your children that there are some parallels between what is happening in the world today and what is happening in this supposedly fiction book. There is also Brave New World is another one. Again, not one I would do as a read aloud, but one that you could have one of your mature children read. Fahrenheit 451, and that one I also used as silent reading. I don't think there was anything, I only ever read it once. I don't recall if there was anything questionable that I wouldn't want to read it aloud, but I didn't read that aloud. That we also used as silent reading. The Tripod series, though, we did do that as a read aloud, and that was actually fantastic, because when I read that to my children, if you watch my Question the Narrative series, you know that I have been addressing the resets quite a bit. And I don't really, to be quite honest with you, I haven't really talked too much with my children about the resets. They hear me talking about, like, my husband, about things that I found, or we might drive past something in the car and I might mention it. Like my kids know what mud flood windows are and everything. But when we were reading the Tripods, that was a great way for me to bring in what a reset is and what a reset might look like, and how, if we look out in the world today, there is much evidence of what we could call a reset, or more than one reset in the world today. And that was all kind of just brought in by this series that we've been doing, that I was reading with my children. So that's another way, that you can kind of bring these topics into your homeschool. But I think that you don't want to teach only the truth or topics to your children, because again, with most of the truth or topics, we don't even know 100% that we are correct. So I think it's more important that our children know that there are no questions that are off the table. They can ask questions about anything, even their faith. I'm a believer, and if my children ask me questions about our faith, I am happy to answer them, because I had a lot of questions growing up, and that is how I ultimately grew a stronger faith, is by asking all of those questions. And I went through that period for years. Like a lot of people who comment on my channel think that I never questioned it, because they think, well, how could she think that? Well, that is exactly how I got to this point. It's because I was questioning things, and I spent years reading about it and researching it. And this is the conclusion that I came to, is that I now have a stronger faith than ever before. And I want my children to actually have that strong faith that they have made their own, and that, again, I have not just passed along to them as a tradition. And if you think about it, that's really what our children are learning in schools, and most of the time in homeschool too, what we're teaching them are just more traditional topics, and we don't know that it's right, but we teach them anyway just because everyone else is doing it. And yeah, unfortunately, I've kind of put that into my homeschool as well, because again, I don't want my children to look like they were not educated, because most people, they would look at what I am researching and they would scoff at it because they have accepted the mainstream narrative. So yeah, I think it's important. Don't just teach your children. This is my opinion. Don't just teach your children only truth or topics, and not give them, a balance or what the other opinion is. You do want your children to be well-rounded in all areas. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.